Hi everyone, welcome to Python Osmosis, episode 32, the screencast that covers the foundations of Python programming. I'm Ryan Shea, and in this episode we'll be talking about reading and writing files. So I've created a file here called work file. And there's just a couple of lines in here. This is the first line of the file, second line of the file. I'm going to hop into IPython here. Python provides a way of creating file objects. So let's create one. F equals open. Open is the function you use to open a file. Work file is the name of the file that I'd like to open. And what we can pass as a second parameter to open is the mode that I'd like to open it with. By default, if I didn't include this at all, then this would open the file with read access. I can be more explicit and put R as a string as a second parameter to open, and it will be opened with read access. But again, that's the same thing as the default here. If I wanted to open it with write access, I would put a W. If I wanted to open it with read and write access, I'd do R plus as a string. And then another way to open a file is with A, is append mode. So rather than with if I use W, then work file would be opened up, destroying any contents and creating a new file, which I just showed you there's a couple of lines in that file. I don't want to blow it away, so I would probably, if I wanted to add on to the end of it, I would use A mode, or I could use R plus. So in this case, we're just opening it as read, and if I say whose, I see that there is F is a file type object, and it's open with mode R. So the first method, the most important thing that you can do with a file type object is read from it. So read takes the parameter of the number of bytes that you'd like to read in from the file. Now, if you don't specify anything to read, it's going to return a string that represents the entire file. It pulls in all the bytes into one string. In this case, I could either set it to a variable. I could say s equals, and then I have a string, or I can just call the read function, and it will return the full string. So you see, carriage returns and all is just one big string. Now, if I try and read again, it's already at the end of file position, so there's nothing more that can be read from this particular file. But there is a method also on file type objects called seek, and I can specify the position that I'd like to seek to. If you think of it sort of like a tape, I'm moving back to position 0 in this file so that I can read again. So now if I said f.read, again I can read in. So let's seek back to 0 here. If I wanted to just pull in one line of a file, I can use the readLine method. So this will just read up, this is the first line of the file up until the carriage return, and including the carriage return, and return that. You can see right there. Once again, you could assign this to a string, and that works just fine. Let's seek back to 0. Let's say you wanted to take the 2 lines that are in this file and you wanted to read those into a list. That's a common way of pulling in data from a file. Read lines is the way that you do that. Now I could say my list equals, let's go ahead and do that, read lines. And you see that this is a list with the comma, the quotes, quoted strings. And now I have my list is a list type, and you see the contents of that particular variable. Let's hop back to the beginning here. Oops. You gotta specify where you'd like it to seek to. So now we're back at the beginning of the file. A common way of looping through a file that's a little bit more clear than pulling in variables that you may or may not need is a for loop. So for line in F, print line, comma, so that it doesn't inject a new line character, because there's already a new line character in there. So this is the first line of the file, second line of the file. So this way you can just easily loop through a file, perform whatever operations you need to on the contents of that file, and be done with it. Let's open up a new file handle here for writing. Let's call it file, my file. My file equals open my file. And again, you have to put that W if you want to write. So now we have an open file handle for my file, and all you have to do, myfile.write is the method that you call, and you can pass in a string. So any string you can write out to the file. Now let's say you have an integer. My int equals 12. If I said myfile.write my int, you see, in order to write out to a file, it must be a string, not an integer. So I would have to say, I'd have to do a string conversion in here if you have something that's non-string. Okay, and it wrote out to the file just fine. Okay, so let's make sure we're back at position 0 here. When you're all done with a file, so my file, what you want to do is call the close method. Okay, so now if I look at whose, you see my file is actually closed. F up here is still open. So that'll flush everything out to disk and make sure that the file is closed. And maybe a better way than handling by specifically opening and closing the file is by using the with keyword. There's actually a couple ways you can do this. You can do a try and a finally loop, but maybe the best way is to use with. So let's take a look. With open foo, open that read only, as f. Actually, we already have an f, so let's call it h, handle. Read data equals f.read. So what we've done is made sure that as soon as this loop is completed, Python will automatically close out that file handle. So if I look at whose, I see h, but it's already closed. So I instantly looped through and read all of the data into this read data variable. So I see read data, I have a string. That's all for now. This screencast is directly inspired by the official Python tutorial by Guido van Rossum at python.org.